I think that leads us well into our practical application. So now how do we use this based on talking about this duel on Mustafar? We talked about kind of all these different pivotal events in Anakin's journey. And we all have pivotal events in our own stories. So how do we avoid at least this one trap? We will talk about how to avoid different villainous traps, but how do we avoid this one trap of anger? And of course, this is going to be overly simplistic because it's a movie, it's Star Wars, and we're only going to be talking about this for a few minutes. But I want to leverage a model, and I think this model was from John Mark Comer. He may have taken it from somewhere else, but a very simple, 6.5, maybe 7 steps model of anger. Because I think we can watch how this plays out in Anakin's life.
Right.
So,
okay. All right, let's do it.
Number 1, you get angry because your will is thwarted. We all have experienced that. I don't have to sell you on. We get angry because we wanted something one way and it happened another way, which results in our ego being wounded. Now, you yourself feel like there is something like a briar in you, basically. There is something that is not right. You're not complete. Right. So you end up playing the self-righteous villain. You end up playing the self-righteous victim in this situation if you cannot process that pain to your ego. And there's a great quote.
Somebody else has hurt me. The world has hurt me. Yes. Okay.
Yes. There's a great quote here from C.S. Lewis. The pleasure of anger, the gnawing attraction which makes one return again and again to its theme, lies. I believe in the fact that one feels entirely righteous when one is angry. Then the other person is pure black and you are pure white.
Yeah, and that's I don't know if fun's the right word, right? But it's very engaging to be angry, to be like, I'm going to solve this problem. This is a problem in the world, and I can't believe that this injustice to me exists, and so I'm going to go crush it, right? It's a little bit empowering. Like I get to go do the thing. I get to go solve the problem. I get to exercise my power. The self-righteousness is 100% one of the reactions to, well, I couldn't possibly be wrong, therefore.
Yeah, Anakin, of course, right? He defies the Jedi Order and having this relationship that he has with Padme, and then she ends up being pregnant. And of course, now he's doubling down on things until he is the self-righteous victim. Well, the Order's the one who's wrong. And so what can he do except follow Palpatine and destroy the Order so that he can be left as the one who's in the right?
Right.
And that's where we're going here, right? So what happens next? Well, once you position yourself as a self-righteous victim in a black and white world, then you can allow contempt to control your heart. There's a David Hume quote on this. We take a piece of something and make it the whole, and then view the whole person through that lens. So now, again, Anakin views the Jedi Order as completely wrong. He now sees that piece of them as the whole thing. That lack of the ability to display emotions or to have relationships, well, because I don't agree with that, the whole thing's off. They're all bad.
Right. Well, and he views everybody through that lens, right? And that's we all do that all the time, right? We all simplify, but he views everybody through that lens. The people that he loves, he views as only potential victims that he has to shelter. The people that he used to love, he views as not trustworthy and so opponents. The people that the one mentor that he trusts is like, well, he must be on my side, so everything he says must be true, right? And you lock yourself into this. Yep. Okay. I'm in. I've done all these things. Check, and check.
Yeah, these will be on screen, by the way. So yeah, the number 5 is materializing the contempt. So this is when it starts to be contextualized for this specific situation in your brain through events. Now, okay, well, what am I going to do about this? This is where you start to think, how does what's inside of me come outside of me? This person doesn't deserve this, so I'm going to undermine them. I'm going to take it from them. We see that with Anakin, obviously, in multiple different ways. With, he executes Order 66 with Palpatine. There's so many different examples where he then turns and undermines the people he views as wrong so that he can be vindicated. And finally, where you end up with is reality is bent. You create a hell on earth around you where there is no, we talked about, it's a narrowing of the abilities that you have to make decisions. It is a cutting off of your relationships where the only way you can see the world now is they are wrong, I am right, why aren't they adhering to the way that I think things should be? And that ends with what I call the final half step, which is the action that's taken into the world where you actually, assault somebody. I mean, as far as murder or other horrible things that can happen. And how do we think those things happen? Well, some of it is because people are mentally ill, and some of it is because And that's all a quantum entanglement that goes
Right.
on of mental illness and contempt and all of these things that kind of build and build and build until you read these terrible stories on the news. How could somebody possibly do that? Well, how could I possibly have lashed out at somebody in that meeting?
Right. Yeah. Like you say, the cycle of anger is it builds up to these things are easier and easier to justify because of your context, because of your framing, because of the way that you've narrowed the view of the world around you. Yeah. That's yeah. That's we can all see ourselves doing that in little ways, right? And we can all see sort of where that goes. And one of the reasons we do this, right, is one of the reasons we do this podcast is because these like big splashy on-screen examples of doing it to the nth degree kind of they penetrate, like they stick to our brains, like they like, oh, okay, yeah. Anyway, I'm not going to go murder a classroom full of kids, but I am absolutely able to be angry and to depersonalize other people in my self-righteous anger and to then behave very unskillfully or in a way that's very much not going to help everybody that's around me. That's 100% a thing that I can do and have done and have to be able to recognize when it starts to arise, when I start to ride that merry-go-round.
Yeah, so what do we do about that? I mean, if we can see a cycle and it's a cycle that when it completes ends in tragedy and ends in even more pain, then the only thing that we can do is try to stop the cycle. And that goes back to what you were talking about with Obi-Wan. We want to stop. We're not going to be able to stop number one necessarily, getting angry because your will is thwarted. There's going to be a moment where somebody cuts you off in traffic and you're like, well, like, you got to be kidding me. Like, I, of course, I know how to drive better than everybody else. Everybody should adhere to the way that I'm driving currently and not cut me off, right? But stopping it there, and as the ego can tend to get wounded there, allowing for a moment to reflect. Don't let it escalate to becoming the victim in the situation, and instead, okay, do I need to just in that situation? I can just verbally or mentally forgive that person right now in my own head and be done with
Right.
it. I don't have to worry about this. I can just keep moving, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's from the very simple things like take a deep breath, like just one in, one out. Have you actually been hurt? Really? Have you
Yeah.
actually been hurt? Right? Right? That's a simple thing to do, right? But also all the way up to kind of what we see Obi-Wan doing, right? Is the I must have been wrong, right? I must not have handled this well or wouldn't have gotten this bad. So, what can I do better next time? How can I reach out to that person and try to do it better together next time? Like the willingness to be potentially wrong, right? That when this conflict has happened, when you got angry, when something went terribly, when you had, some negative interaction, at least be open to the idea that it might be you that had screwed up.
Yeah. Yeah. Or it's at least some shade of gray in what happened in the situation, and making it black and white is the biggest possible risk. And going and having that crucial conversation with somebody one on one. This is what I notice is lost most in the world of today. Is people are less and less willing for one reason or another to have these difficult conversations with each other. And I mean, in a workplace setting, I've had to get better about that. I've had good mentors that have taught me to get better at that. That when somebody wrongs you and you feel like you might start this cycle of anger, sometimes the only thing to do is to pull them aside in a one-on-one and just, reflect beforehand, compose your thoughts in a way that's kind, and just share that with them. And maybe like you said, maybe, am I really wronged? Am I really hurt? That's the first step. But then if you feel like you are, it's okay to go address that with somebody. And even more importantly, if you feel like you may have done that to somebody else, then even more impetus on me that I need to go have a conversation with that person and make it right. I don't want this cycle of anger for anybody.
Right. Well, and then in this context, and we'll talk about more of this in the next episode, I think. But in this context of of a leadership podcast or leadership lessons, if you're in the position of leadership and you feel you may have been the person that that hurt somebody, if you feel like or if at least you just acknowledge that there is some conflict, some negative interaction you're having with somebody, if they are subordinate to you or have less influence than you or in less position of a privilege than you, then they are likely not going to feel comfortable bringing it up. They're not going to feel comfortable addressing it or challenging you, right? It's gonna be on you to decide, and it might be that they did something incredibly terrible and needed to be flamed, and but letting the resentment linger about that, letting unclarity linger about that is not necessarily going to be better, right? As your leader, whether or not you were in the wrong, you're probably going to have to be the one to initiate those crucial conversations, whether to course correct yourself or to course correct somebody else. That's part of the leadership responsibility. Is you can't expect somebody else to come and tell you that there's a problem that needs to be fixed, right? You can't expect somebody else to come and tell you that you were wrong, because sort of by definition they don't have that authority, or they will very, especially if you've demonstrated your anger in the past, they will very reasonably expect that this is not a thing that's going to go well. And so it just makes it harder, right? It makes it harder and harder when you're supposed to be the one that knows what's going on, when you're supposed to be the one in control, when you're supposed to be the more mature, more professional, more accomplished one. If you screwed up, then it's extra on you to figure it out. And if you haven't screwed up, sorry, but you're the leader. It's still on you.
Wow. And it brings us all the way to the end of the podcast almost here with, again, bringing back character is destiny. Because if we're able to make these decisions, if we're able to forgive, if we're able to reflect, if we're able to have those crucial conversations, what it does is, instead of going down the Anakin arc where we just keep doubling down on the internal struggles that we're having that just make us more and more navel gazers, we can have the opposite effect, where you can have a narrowing and narrowing and narrowing of your ability to make good decisions. And it becomes the default response when you're damaged by somebody or you're hurt, to stop and reflect before you allow yourself to become angry, to go and address it with them directly. And then, more importantly, as a leader, even than that, is to teach others to do likewise.